Can violence ever be justified? With so much political division in the Western world and high emotions on both sides, we are seeing a rise in activism and demonstrations in defense of people's beliefs. And we should not be surprised at this, as a society which values freedom of speech and true democracy should advocate for such things. But when the emotions run too high, this display of public opinion often evolves into violence and acts of aggression as people lash out at those who they deem to be wrong. Hi, I'm R.
And I'm Jay.
And in this video, we're going to discuss the question, can violence in defense of a belief ever be justified? Let's get to it. Okay, so let's get Nesrine Malik from The Guardian to give us a hand with this question.
When they go low, going high is not enough. Let's get this straight. In principle, it's never okay to hit anyone, Nazi or otherwise.
Well, perhaps this will be a pretty short video then, because that's a very clear statement.
But when Richard Spencer was punched while giving an interview in the street, it was a cathartic moment for many.
Well, not for him or any proponents of free speech.
A lot of us find ourselves at a loss for how to respond as frightening and dangerous views are suddenly not only being aired, but mainstreamed.
The point to remember is that frightening and dangerous ideas are subjective terms. Something you deem to be dangerous or frightening may be benign or even reassuring to someone else. For instance, I'm sure Richard Spencer didn't think it was a good idea for someone to punch Richard Spencer in the head, but as you mentioned, it was quite pleasurable for many people to watch. If you can justify violence in response to a situation which you deem frightening or dangerous, then you must afford the same standard to others who may find themselves in a situation they deem dangerous or frightening. The problem with this approach is that people are sensitive to these emotions, and if we take the standard of resorting to violence in these scenarios, then it will be a short but vicious cycle of violence until one group has subdued the other through force. That's why in developed societies we talk about abstaining from violence in favor of reasoned discussion.
Unable to adjust, we continued to engage with these views like they were just a new school of controversy. The world had changed, but we hadn't caught up. That punch, it caught us up.
Wait, how did the world change? And how did a punch catch anyone up to anything? Let's be clear, that punch was a step towards fascism. Unless your goal is to be more like Nazis, then that punch was nothing but a disruption to public discourse. When you look at history's most infamous tyrants, you will see a long list of different labels: dictator, communist, Nazi, terrorist, fascist, religious extremist, totalitarian, and much more. But the one thing they all have in common is that they were willing to use force in order to ensure others accepted what they believed to be right. As soon as you are willing to do the same thing, then you just become a new addition to that list. So are you willing to make social justice warrior a synonym for fascist?
When they go low, we go high,
said Michelle Obama, amid the rising ugliness of Trump's campaign. Well, going high doesn't always work. Some positions simply cannot be entertained, let alone argued against.
Okay, so the question to ask is, who determines what is beyond argument? As soon as you enter the realm of some ideas are beyond discussion, you risk your own ideas falling into that category. This is starting to sound like Kim Jong-un's memoirs. Following this line of reasoning, the deciding factor for which ideas overstep the line of reasonable argument belong to whoever is stronger at the time.
There is this fallacy on the left around reasoned debate.
A fallacy of reasoned debate. The thing by which fallacies are defined is in fact a fallacy itself. I would never have guessed that one. Please explain to me how using reasoned discussion is fallacious.
Don't assault and boycott racists and misogynists. Debate with them.
Well, if they aren't resorting to violence or the use of force, then you should debate with them. If you immediately jump to violence in that scenario, then you can't claim the moral high ground. However, if they are resorting to violence, then you should have the right to defend yourself. But you see how quickly that turns around on you? If you are the one resorting to violence, then you are the one people should be uniting against in self-defense.
Don't go low, go high. Be better. But why?
Did you really just ask why we should be better than Nazis? I would imagine that's pretty self-explanatory. We don't want more Nazis.
Why should we be better? Just for the sake of being better? Or because being better produces results?
Which results you choose to prioritize is important. Being better brings about a subjective discussion, and the reductionist concepts of results can't be the only consideration. You know what got a lot of results? Ethics-free medical research performed on Jews in concentration camps. The reason we don't have that is because we have decided as a society that we can slow down the results of medical science in exchange for ethical conduct. However, I am starting to fear that you are not capable of such nuance. Now, before we move on, I would like to point out that nonviolence is perfectly capable of yielding results. A good example would be Gandhi's nonviolent resistance to imperialism. Maybe Gandhi would have gotten it done faster if he took up a machete and just started hacking people up, but he would have lost all integrity and perverted his goals in the process, creating a new monster likely worse than the one he wanted to slay.
This philosophical Achilles heel is paralyzing liberal democracy.
By very definition, liberal democracy cannot condone violence for any one particular group within its governance. See this definition: a form of government characterized by fair, free, and competitive elections between multiple distinct political parties, a separation of powers into different branches of government, the rule of law in everyday life as part of an open society, and the equal protection of human rights, civil liberties, and political freedoms for all. Now, what you should notice is the political freedoms for all people. That includes people you don't agree with.
Would I encourage people to go around punching Nazis? No. But I will also not condemn them for doing so.
You realize that listing justifications for punching Nazis and stating that you won't condemn someone for it is tantamount to condoning punching Nazis. Otherwise, there is no point to your video.
The punch was a calling out after a time when too many things were not called out for what they really are. Going high might make us feel good about being the better party, but it is not a suitable response. And it doesn't work.
Not a suitable response. When someone is addressing you in a non-violent means, the only suitable response is a non-violent one. It is entirely unsuitable to react with violence against a non-violent and non-aggressive opponent. Not only is it unsuitable, it is the antithesis of a liberal democracy, which is the thing you claim to be defending. Also, just because you didn't get the result you specifically wanted doesn't mean democracy didn't work. This all comes down to the subjectivity of what is right and wrong. If you can't demonstrate that you were right without resorting to violence, I hope you never get what you want. You also appear to be ignoring the fact that non-violent protest has historically resulted in progression of civil liberties, and there is no reason it can't continue to do so.
Particularly now, while we face a clear assault on hard-won freedoms and equalities.
That's a rather ironic statement given the context of this video.
There is a narcissism of good behavior that needs to be jettisoned.
I don't think narcissism is an ideal motivator for good behavior, but it is definitely not a good reason to jettison the concept of good behavior or to promote alternatively bad behaviors. This would be a completely different situation if the people you were talking about were using violence. If there were people using violence to progress their beliefs, I would advocate for fighting back hard to maintain our freedom and open society. But if I stick to that principle, the only person I should be using violence against is the people you won't condemn.
There is a complacency born out of a combination of shock, privilege, and inertia that makes some think that keeping the dignity of liberalism intact will somehow shame bigots into behaving.
Cultural shaming is not the primary means by which laws are enforced within a democracy. Laws are written after due process and for the purpose of maintaining a civil society. What you are suggesting is that because you can't shame someone into your way of thinking, it should be acceptable to resort to violence. This is a direct violation of law and civil liberty, which you seem to believe is your personal privilege. This inherent privilege you believe you hold over others is a prejudice against anyone who disagrees with you. That makes you a bigot.
The alternative to all this futile, false equivalency debate is simply to call everything out and protest it, boycott it, march against it, and never let it settle.
I have no problem with those things. Protest, speak out, don't let things settle. Just do it without resorting to violence or advocating for others to be violent. I know you claim you aren't advocating violence, but the content of your video says otherwise. Further, the things you listed are the same things you implied weren't enough, and hence violence had to enter the fray, which I just found contradictory. Living in a democracy means you will have to live side by side with someone who disagrees with you about something. You share equal rights with these people, and everything you feel you are entitled to do to them, they should be equally applicable to you. In situations like this, there is no objective way to determine what is right. It is based on your subjective opinion, and if you don't feel someone should be able to physically assault you because of your subjective opinion, then you should have absolutely no right to assault them for theirs, unless they are physically attacking you first, and them speaking about positions you don't agree with does not qualify as physical violence. There is an interesting trend occurring within the far left. Extreme liberalism has reached a precipice of perceived moral high ground by shaming others with buzzwords and labels designed to degrade a person's humanity and moral standing. Some of these neoliberals are attempting to justify violent practices which are in direct contradiction to a liberal democracy, as we were seeing from this video and the aftermath of the Richard Spencer punch attack. The response to this has not been met with the appropriate aberration from the liberals. Far too often do we throw away the principles by which we stand when it suits our own agenda. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for regular videos, like this video, and share it around to help us raise the bar of public discourse.